I had a bunch of fun episodes planned for the new year, and then my hometown caught fire. Last month, in my episode about the Muppet Christmas Carol, I joked that it wasn't so bad that it rained so much here in England where I live, because back home in California, for at least 1 month of the year, the place is on fire. The good thing about dark humor is that it lets you laugh at things that are difficult to deal with. The bad thing about dark humor is that it's rooted in very real pain, and I can't even really properly express what it feels like to see my home, a place that I love fiercely and that holds so many people that I love fiercely, just up in flames, just so much just gone. There's an unpleasant irony to all of this because my village in the Midlands of England has just been cleaning up from the latest round of flooding. One of my homes is frozen and wet, and the other one is on fire. Of course, when there's an emergency like this, the most important thing is human life. After that, people's homes and their property. But a big part of what makes a place home is also the culture that's there, the locations that create memories, the landmarks, the architecture. And I just kind of wanted to briefly talk about what places in Los Angeles are now gone that have a literary connection and that cannot be replaced. The Eaton Fire is currently burning very close to where I grew up. I didn't grow up in Altadena, but I grew up really close to it, and over the years I've had a lot of friends who have lived there. There's a house that burned to the ground where in high school I went to a barbecue and held hands with my boyfriend for the first time. I went to a wedding in Altadena. I used to go to the Bunny Museum. The last time my family went back to America for a visit, we stayed in Altadena at this cute little bungalow with an orange tree in the backyard, and that house is no longer there. One of the homes that's been destroyed was the Zane Grey Estate. These days, a lot of people might not know who Zane Grey is, but it's impossible to overstate his influence on the genre of Western literature. Zane Grey's most famous book was Riders of the Purple Sage, and his other novels would end up having a huge impact on writers like Louis L'Amour and all the many, many filmmakers over the years who have made Western films. Even in the modern day, shows like Westworld or Sheriff Callie's Wild West have a lot of the tropes that began in Zane Grey novels. Zane Grey wasn't from California, but he did come to settle in California, and about 100 years ago, he built this beautiful Spanish Revival house. It always remained as a private residence and it wasn't a museum, but it was a very beautiful home and an important part of Altadena's literary history, and whenever I happened to be in the area, it was fun if I got to drive by and peek out the window of the car as we drove past. As of the time that I'm recording this, the Eaton Fire has just reached the perimeter of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. I visited JPL a bunch of times as a kid, and it's such an exciting place that I've been surprised to see how few people outside LA have heard of it. JPL is where NASA researches and develops robotic spacecraft. It's where our space telescopes and Mars rovers come from. It's not possible to list how many writers have been inspired by the space program. If a story has something to do with satellites, space probes, scanning other worlds, it owes something to JPL. The most recent big story that partly takes place there was The Martian, which was written by Andy Weir. Star Trek The Motion Picture is based on the Voyager program, which started at JPL in the 1960s and is still running today. I can't say for sure what'll happen, but JPL has a few things going for it that make me think it'll survive. It's built into the Arroyo Seco, which is a deep canyon with a creek running through it. The foliage there is not as dry as the stuff up in the hills, and the deep canyon allows for a lot of space between the trees on one side and the other. JPL is also, for reasons of national security, a fortress. It has tall fencing and perimeter roads that act as fire breaks while allowing perfect access for emergency vehicles. So I think JPL stands a good chance of surviving the Eaton Fire, and I hope it will inspire writers for many more years. The Palisades Fire is by far the biggest fire that's burning in Los Angeles, and it's pretty much completely wiped out the Palisades. This was a really beautiful area. It could be a complete pain in the neck to try to drive through because you have these cliffs tumbling down to the sea and the streets are really narrow. So when you did have to go through the Palisades, you always planned for a lot of extra time. But it was fun because that also gave you time to look out the window at all of those cute little mid-century bungalows. When the fire first broke out in the Palisades, my first thought was, oh no, what about the Getty Villa? If you've never had the chance to visit the Getty Villa, I am happy to say you still will, because the staff there did a really, really good job of keeping the brush clean around the villa. They didn't allow anything to build up that could suddenly go up in smoke, and they carefully monitored the property. And if you look at burn maps of the Palisades, basically everything's gone, and then there's this tiny little island, and that's the Getty Villa. The villa was built to replicate an estate that had been excavated in the ancient Roman city of Pompeii. All of the plants in the garden were carefully chosen to recreate the sights, smells, and sounds of an ancient Roman garden, and the villa itself is a wonderful museum. Luckily, it's also designed to be a fortress that will protect its collections. The walls are double thick, and everything can be sealed off. They also have good storage options for a lot of the collections. You get the word priceless thrown around a lot, but in the case of museums like this, it's literally true. These items cannot be replaced. Obviously, it won't be open to visitors for a while, I assume, while they check the collections, make sure there isn't smoke damage, and just generally wait for things to calm down in the Palisades area. But I'm at least happy to say that the collections housed in the Getty Villa appear to be safe, and the villa itself is safe, which is important because the building itself, it's not just a museum. It's also a work of art. It's also an incredibly important part of our culture. As of a few hours ago, the Palisades Fire had reached Brentwood and was creeping north toward the Getty Center. This is a different museum from the Getty Villa, and it's one of my favorite places to take friends who are visiting from out of town, even if it means driving on the 405. The museum has a lot of nice variety, but I've always especially adored its spectacular collection of manuscripts. I always have to be dragged out of the room where they display incredibly gorgeous medieval texts. I'm sure the Getty has the ability to secure its collection, but even the possibility of harm coming to a place that's done so much to protect and preserve rare books makes me really sad. Because the Palisades has always been a popular place for writers, musicians, filmmakers, and actors to live in, a lot of homes with literary connections have now been wiped off the map. A big part of what makes it fun to live in Los Angeles is just the number of times you see familiar sights driving around town. You'll just drive through the 3rd Street Tunnel and think of how many different films and commercials that you've seen that were filmed there. Or, you'll just drive by certain buildings or landmarks and you just recognize them and they're like old friends. Back in Altadena, there's a famous street called Christmas Tree Lane, and it had these really beautiful tall trees that I believe came from the Himalayas originally. And every year for more than 100 years, this street has gone bonkers with Christmas decorations. That street, that tradition, that part of our culture, it's now gone. The Bunny Museum is gone. That little motel in Malibu is gone. I will never again walk by the Will Rogers house when I want to hike up to Inspiration Point. Landscapes are a huge part of what inspires writers to write. If you think about your favorite children's book, there's probably something in there that connects it to a place. And descriptions of buildings, hillsides, trees, plants, the sound of the birds that live in the area. This is all really, really important, and it contributes hugely to creative cultures and writing new stories. This is a little bit of an atypical episode for me, but it all just hit so hard, and it's just so difficult to know that so many landscapes that inspired so many writers over the years are just gone, and they're never coming back, and there's nothing I can do about that. However, Californians are optimists by nature. You can blame all the sunshine and healthy food for that. I hope that even if some of the places can't be rebuilt exactly as they were, Maybe there'll be ways to create new literary landscapes, new buildings that look like familiar friends to me, new places that will continue to inspire the writers who come to California and help create so many of the stories that inspire us. If you're back in LA, if you're a friend or a stranger, I'm thinking of you. I love you, LA. You'll get through this.